What's up, NBA fan? What's up, all sports fans? This your boy JB, host of the Behind the Bench podcast networking channel. Want to give a shout out to the rest of the crew. I'm talking about Shy, Kelvin, Jermaine, KB Film Room, Big Dog Talk Sports. That's right. That's right. For everyone who's tuning in, we hope that you support Behind the Bench, become a subscriber, and help make this show the best that it can be. Now, this is something that I really want to talk about, shed light on. This has been widely anticipated for a long time when it comes to a fan of the NBA, such as myself, who's had the opportunity to watch NBA basketball for a very long time. Decade after decade after decade after decade after decade. And what I've noticed over these past 10 years is constant. And I don't necessarily think it's because of social media. I don't think it's because of that. Because if you didn't have social media, you would still have these conversations and interpersonal experiences. People that you see on a daily basis, right? So this is not about social media. This is about how the NBA has been manipulated badly over the past 2 decades, over the past 20 years. And what happened was, because of the manipulation of the game, it created a generational divide. It created animosity, not just by older fans, but by the youth generation of new NBA fans. And see, what brought forth this future roundtable discussion by NBA executives, particularly the current commissioner of the league, Adam Silver, to respond in such a way where is being revealed that the NBA's competition committee has begun reviewing whether the game has been too advantageous for offense and what changes are needed for balance. I'm going to repeat that one more time. The NBA's competition committee has begun reviewing whether the game has been too advantageous for offense and what changes are needed for balance. So in other words, when the commissioner presided and attended this year's NBA All-Star game, where he witnessed and basketball fans tuning in witnessed, as well as those who attended the game in person, witnessed a team score over 200 points, where both teams combined for over 400 points total in scoring between the both of them, where no defense was being played, where no defense was emphasized. And the commissioner responded after the game. Remember what he said? Well, I'm just paraphrasing. He didn't look too pleased about the outcome. He said, well, y'all scored the most points. Like, I guess. Right? So, based on the All-Star game, the All-Star game is a reflection of the state of the league. Now, all of a sudden, the competition committee wants to address what many fans of past generations have tried to express to the youth generation of fans. Or let's just say the fans of the recent 2 decades who have watched basketball based on the rule changes that were implemented during the beginning of the 2000s. That has led to the proliferation of offensive production that we now see on a nightly basis. So much so where we are seeing more double-digit victories than any time in the history of this league. When you manipulate the game, you manipulate the perception of fans who didn't have the opportunity to see the game played a different way, or according to this report, in a more balanced fashion. And the manipulation of these rules, the rule changes, they were designed to create freedom of movement, eliminated hand checking, implemented the 3-second defensive rule that that prohibited the center to really guard and defend the paint, where he was forced to react outside the paint to play defense, which created open driving lanes for perimeter-oriented players, particularly starting the offensive attack from the top of the key, which led to a drive and kick style of play, which led to the proliferation of what became known as spot-up shooters. But what happened in the process was, not until, I would say, the past 3 or 4 seasons, the center position became compromised. The center position became less of an emphasis on a team's success, not just on defense, but on offense too. The center position became devalued, where the league was based on center dominance. That's when you know the league is operating at its best. When you have dominant center play, a la Nikola Jokic, a la Joel Embiid, right? You look at Chet Holmgren, who technically he's a second-year player, but he missed his entire rookie season due to injury. Look at the impact that he's had on the Oklahoma City Thunder this year. Look at how that team has taken off. And they have years to come. What I'm getting at is, this has never been about skill. This has never been about which era is the best. This is based on the manipulation of the game. So we've been pressed by talking heads and pundits alike that this current era is the best we've ever seen. It stands above the rest. It led young fans to conclude that past generations featured no more than plumbers and firemen, which is an insult to those players who are the pioneers of the sport and pioneers of this league. So if the level of play is that much more advanced, then you would need to have the competition committee to address what fans of previous eras of NBA basketball has been voicing their concern about. So this offensive explosion where we see, multiple players generate triple-double output on the regular, where in generations past, it was more an exception than the norm, an exception than the rule, where now it's more rule than the exception. But it's all based on, not saying that these players aren't great. That's not the issue. I don't like to compare eras. Because think about it. Now, it's one thing to say, it's all about what that player achieved when he played. How dominant was that player during the era that he played? How much did he win during the era that he played? And what steps or what was the manner in which that player pursued winning? See, all that plays into a factor. But the NBA never had to conduct a study by its competition committee as to what steps can be implemented to balance play between offense and defense, because the game functioned on a more authentic basis. It was based on the fundamental elements of talent, chemistry, coaching, and the willingness to compete at the highest level. No strings attached. And this is what older fans have been saying the whole time. These past two All-Star games were an eye-opener, because all it did was provided a clear-cut view of exactly where the league stood. And contrary to popular belief, because of the manipulation of the game and this inflated offensive production that we're seeing, it has turned off a lot of fans. And as a result, everything in conjunction with the game itself has been devalued. Meaning, when someone scored 50 points back in the day, they scored 50. But when a player scores 50 today, it often feels like they scored 30. And that's the difference. It's not the quantity, it's the quality. So when you de-emphasize the game by limiting or trying to discourage defense, you're going to get more sporadic play. Players will lose the fundamental aspect of knowing how to play defense, right? And what happens is undue criticism is directed towards players for something that they didn't cause the problem in which they're being criticized for. But in the process, a lot of players who prefer this style of play, they looking at it from a self-serving lens. And this is how the game becomes compromised. Now, mind you, I do believe the new generation of NBA stars who did not participate or play in the NBA over these past 15 years, I do believe they have the natural inclination to compete on both sides of the court. But that has to be emphasized and encouraged. So really, when the NBA quote unquote opened up the game, they actually set the game back. Even when they thought it was achieving the results that they were looking for or so desired. But if it's not authentic, if it's not real, it won't last, it won't stand, and it will not come across. It will not gel with basketball fans who watched the NBA at the highest level. So all these undue arguments back to back, going back to back with each other over the past 15 years, it's been a waste of time for everybody. I won't say a waste of time, but it's like beating a dead horse. Because the reason why these debates linger, it goes deeper than who you think is the better player. Now we're talking about eras. Which era has firemen or electricians or plumbers or any daytime job to make ends meet? During the league's infancy stages of the 1950s or whatnot. So what I'm getting at is the rules that were implemented during the 50s and 60s, the implementation of the 24-second shot clock, those rules elevated the game and enhanced the game without compromising the game. But the rules that were implemented 20 years ago, it compromised the game and it generated superficial offensive production. What I'm getting at is it made marginal players look average. It made average players look good. It made good players look great. It made great players look like all-stars. It made all-stars look like superstars. It made superstars look like Mount Rushmore players. And it's all based on the manipulation of these rules that were designed to superficially enhance offensive production, which has led to an over-reliance on the three-point shot. Now, mind you, players are making the three-point shot in higher efficiency because they practice it more than past players, but they've lost the in-between game, the mid-range game, where you really only have a handful of players in the NBA right now that excel at the mid-range game. A handful. When I mean a handful, I'm talking about sticking out one hand, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fingers. That's what I'm talking about. But back then, to be an elite offensive player, particularly from the wing position, you had to develop bona fide go-to moves. So you have a lot of players in the league now, and it's not a fault. It's no fault of their own. They're still the greatest basketball players in the world. But a lot of these players generate their offense from manipulation of the rules. And they shoot the three-point shot or they drive to the basket. No in-between game. But back then in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, prior to emphasizing of these new rules of the 2000s, you had to have that mid-range game, which expanded other parts of your game. That's the difference. So what I'm getting at is this proves once and for all, it's not about errors. It's not about this generation having better athletes and nothing like that. I mean, we've seen athletes of every decade, every era who can jump out the gym. The difference is it's just more people playing basketball, playing the sport of basketball more than ever because the population continues to grow in this world. So you have more of a pool of people, gravitating to playing the sport of basketball while coming up as kids, teenagers, or whatnot. So to make a long story short, The NBA's competition committee has begun reviewing whether the game has been too advantageous for offense and what changes are needed for balance. In other words, letting players actually go out there and play defense without consequence. I ain't talking about playing dirty. I'm talking about D'ing up. Scottie Pippen made a comment around 2010. This was, ironically, this was during the All-Star break of 2010, 2011, where he was being interviewed during the All-Star festivities. And he said, well, the league is trying to get away from defense and trying to de-emphasize the defensive aspect of basketball to appeal to the more casual fan. But see, you can't do that because you can attract casual fans with the game as is in balance. And they could become long-standing fans down the line if they so choose. And that's why the All-Star games become so lethargic over the past 5 years. It's all, see, when I look at this era of the past 15 years, when I mean past 15 years, I'm really referring to the beginning of the super team era. And it's been a detriment. Really, the super team era, when you get down to it, is a culmination of how the league tried to manipulate style of play, offense. So when you try to elevate offense at the expense of defense, well, that may lead to superstars concluding that the only way you can win by not emphasizing defense is teaming up with other superstars and trying to run the table. And at that point, you're playing 2K video game basketball. So when people say rules don't matter, yes, they do. Yes, they do. Because once you start going down that route and you start, delving into that rabbit hole, it can lead to other problems. Where they say players are too friendly with each other, stuff like that. But the beautiful thing about life is it has a way of correcting itself once the problem is identified and solutions are brought to the table. And that same perspective and optimism can apply to the NBA. If the NBA gets out, and when it finally gets out of its own way. Because one of the reasons why I believe they quote unquote open up the game is for certain players to shine. That's a whole nother story. But you can't do that, man. And see, I hate to say this, man, but a lot of this gets back to wanting to supplant Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, see, I think a lot of younger fans really don't understand how great Michael Jordan was. If you take away the numbers, the averages, him averaging 30 points for his career or whatnot, if you really look at it, Michael Jordan was so good that the only way contending teams or teams during that time who had championship aspirations felt that they could beat Michael Jordan, they had to emphasize defense, not offense, defense. And as a result, throughout the 90s, the league became more defensive oriented. Not saying they didn't play defense in the 80s. That's not what I'm saying, or in the 70s. Because I believe the 80s, that was the golden era of basketball. I would say out of your top 10 all-time greatest teams, consensus-wise, I would say arguably 40% or 4 of the top 10 all-time greatest championship teams played in the 1980s. 86 Celtics, 87 Lakers, 83 76ers, and I would say the 89 bad boy Detroit Pistons. Those 4 teams right there. So Michael Jordan was so great. His talent was so immense that the only way teams felt that they can defeat him was emphasize defense. And as a result, the 90s era of NBA basketball presented a more defensive-oriented game. And I believe that truly originated from concluding this is the only way that you can stop this guy. You see? And therefore, by him being the sole focus of who teams, zone in on when they face Chicago Bulls in the playoffs, that allowed Pippen to facilitate. You see, not having to focus on scoring outside of the triangle system. I know I'm getting off tangent a little bit, but I'm just trying to say that a lot of this has to do with they've sat down. That's why there's so much of an attack on Michael Jordan to this day. That's the root of this attempt to dethrone Jordan or discredit his accomplishments, or to downright try to eliminate him from the basketball conscience. Because they have tried to come up with schemes and mechanisms and way of manipulation to what they feel in their mind they have to do to finally move on from the influence and the phenomenon known as Michael Jordan. But if they will look at it in a different lens and say, well, he's the standard. This is who you got to get to. And I ain't talking about taking no shortcuts either. I'm talking about if you want to say you better than him, you got to do exactly what he did and beyond when it comes to winning without taking shortcuts. If someone's not willing to do that, or if they don't meet that mark, they can't be better than him. It's as simple as that. And I believe a lot of the attempts to open up the game to make it possible for players of that forthcoming era to produce offensive stats that a lot of basketball fans highlight, trying to prove that those players are better than players of yesterday, is based on, these statistics that were generated from the era of manipulating of the rules. And that's why you got this confrontation and generational divide that exists at this point. But if they do the right thing and correct this situation and allow players to defend properly, hand checking or eliminating the 3-second defensive rule, you're going to see a difference. Because when a center can defend the paint without having to worry about, committing a violation, violating the 3-second defensive rule, what happens is that allows the perimeter players to close out on the 3-point shooters. Also, I'm pretty confident that you will see less switching on defense, because your big man is there to anchor you if your guy gets past you trying to drive to the basket. You will see less driving and kicking. It will force offensive-oriented players to be more well-rounded than they are. It will make the game better. Manipulating the rules to inflate offense, it de-emphasized the game, which ultimately de-emphasized defense. Well, devalue the game, I should say. Devalue the game, which devalued defense. And ultimately, offense is devalued. Because the sharper the defense is, it's going to force those offensive-oriented players to sharpen their skills in the process. And that's why Michael Jordan was unguardable. That's why he had no flaws in his game. So I just want to throw that out there. This shows once for all that they know a problem exists and that it needs to be corrected. And all they have to do is apply logic, and you will see a difference. This game will be more balanced. It will be more exciting to play. I think the officiating would improve too. All they have to do is make nothing drastic, but just logical based moves and watch everything begin to flow. And the NBA will be exactly where it needs to be. So I just want to throw that out there. Until next time, this is JB. That's right. JB for BTB, Behind the Bench.